know you're doing some stuff here still behind the scenes. So some of you may not have gotten notified today. Apologies about that. So Tim was getting our team to scramble and send that out last minute. So welcome to this week's weekly briefing. I'm Joel, joined by this guy over my left shoulder. And we're here in New York together, which is kind of a nice, rare moment for Tim and I. As much as we travel, we sometimes actually do spend time together in the same space, in the same room. And we actually had a cohort dinner last night. It was a very informal one, but it was a lot of fun. Tim, do you have any takeaways or anything you want to share about that before we jump into the topic?
You know, it's always great to be part of the community in real space, real time, because you get a familiarity with the topics and the issues and people and their companies from a distance. But then to sit down a concentrated time and just sit across the table for somebody. And I really loved it. Molly, who came out last night, I've never met her face to face. She's been part of the community for a while now. And just to hear what's going on with her company, how it's going, how busy she is, the way she's solving problems, like to have a deep conversation. When else would I have that unless you have a one-on-one engagement? So those are just fun dinners to meet people and start hearing about their life.
So I guess this will be my shameless plug. If you have an opportunity, make sure you check into the Tim, what's the space? I'm forgetting. Let's meet up space in the community. Visit that once in a while to see where either Tim or myself or your peers are in the world, and get some FaceTime together, because it's really fantastic to get together in person now and then. With that, I'm going to share my screen and go back to our topic today: how your 2023 will end. So this was a topic that came to our attention because we have a lot of owners that we work with one-on-one, behind the scenes, right? These are very private engagements where we're helping and advising people. And we do a certain number of routines where when we get through half the year, we start to say, okay, what did that mean? What did we observe? What just happened? And Tim, this year has been, I don't know, what's the word? Sucky for most.
I would say it's sucky. Yes.
Right? And as a result, we're not only saying, well, what happened, right? And saying, what can we learn from first quarter and second quarter? But now as we enter into the second half of the year, I know, Tim, if I was your client and I was still running my studio, I would be saying, Tim, how can we turn things around and make up for all the ground we lost, or how far we are behind, so that we can end the year on a high note? And this is something I think a lot of owners are asking. We're hearing people talk about how are things? Is the economy turning around? Is the year going to end up better? And Tim, how would you start advising me as your as your client who's saying,
yeah, sure,
help me turn this around?
Yeah, you know, the word turnaround is something we always want, right? So, hey, I didn't meet my expectations from this point or up into this point in this year. Can I make up for lost time, make up for lost revenue, and actually, catch up to what my annual expectations were? The answer to that is there is always an opportunity. Joel, you and I were talking just yesterday about a client that you knew, had a bad Q1 and Q2 did that work, just made up for it. But the way we actually project forward, right, how your year is going to end, it's not always the healthiest agenda to say, I deserve to make the revenue I thought I was going to make in January from this point forward, and therefore put pressure on myself or create comparisons of myself as if it wasn't a bad quarter and it wasn't a bad economy and clients didn't have issues, to make up for that so that I can be made whole. That's probably the wrong way of looking at it. What we want to do is be able to say, now that we know what we've known this year, what should I do between now and the end of the year, so that at minimum I've adjusted or whatever the reality is from July through December of 2023.
Yeah, because I will say, here's where my head would start. If I'm an owner, I would be saying, okay, Tim, I'm going to look at my numbers. First quarter was terrible. Second quarter was pretty bad. And now I'm going to just say, what if we repeat that for the next 2 quarters? And I would project out to the end of the year, and it would probably be very grim, because I would say, hey, I have a machine that's this big, this size team, this size lease. I mean, all these different commitments. And hey, I want to feed that machine, but based on the last 2 quarters, that doesn't sound very good. So how do I get back to that place where I deserve for the machine I built to be fed? So I'm going to always come to you and say, how do I do that? So where would you take me?
Yeah, so there's probably an obvious element of looking at your present situation and recognizing the rest of the year is probably going to be based off of what we're looking at right now in the present, not my original expectations in January, or if I look back for the last, forget that. Let's just say, hey, now that I know it's July 2023 and the reality of that, how about I build expectations from right now for the next 6 months? And that might be, a cold, hard look at who you have on staff, what expenses you have out there regularly, and the expectation that you might have this year, and that's not going to come in. Well, I need to adjust my overhead to the new reality. But that's not the whole picture. There are how the year is going to be for us. We can look at other data points and start understanding our closer to reality of what at least quarter 3 is going to look like. When we're July 19th, 2023, I can pretty much predict that between now and the end of September what my runway is going to be, because I have sales pipelines in place, for example, that can give me some of those insights, or projects I currently have in house with accounts receivable attached to those. That gives me some sense of a runway. So even looking 6 months forward to the end of the year, I really already have 3 of those months with some good visibility to know how that's going to play out. And therefore, I'm really just managing an unknown Q4 right now in July.
Okay, so can you take us maybe through that process and show us what that might look like based on some example data? And of course,
Yeah, sure. One thing that we do for our clients is we do these things called quarterly reports. And what I'm showing you right now is old data. This is just a sample that we show people can look like and the kind of data you have. And the big picture takeaway I want to look at here is that we've taken data and put it into graphic form. That's the big piece we're going to look at. The data itself has its own story, and each company would be able to look at these data points and know why their expenses are the way they were, and why their revenue was the way they were, and why their losses were there. They can assign it to a project specifically or an overhead choice or whatever. But what we're mostly looking at right now is just how in graphic form can look at something on a quarter by quarter basis and look at patterns that exist. For example, the graph right here is just 4 years, looking back 4 years of just quarter 1. And you can see, hey, most likely in the first quarter, we're around $2 million to $2.3 million. That's a standard. Oh, 2 years ago, it was a bad year. So I could, you're saying, oh, I can actually recognize what a bad year looks like and our ability to adjust when that happens, but also like what one quarter might look like over the other. So in graphic form, we're seeing pattern and pattern recognition to some of what's possible. We could also see something like in the idea of cost of goods sold in comparison to revenue. In graphic form, what it looks like when your revenue drops and you keep cost of goods sold that remain the same, the percentage, even though the cost of goods sold are equal to every single quarter, when the revenue drops, man, that cost of goods eats a lot of that revenue away. And this starts creating us a certain kind of behavior and recognition of what changes we can make, and hopefully learning so we're proactive. So if I were looking at a pattern, something like the revenue timeline, and trying to look at my last 2 quarters of the last 4 years, I can say, oh, usually from July through September, my revenue drops. Look at that. In 2021, it dropped. In 2020, it dropped. In 2019, it was flatline. Okay, that's that weird anomaly here. I should expect for the next 3 months that my revenue is going to drop. And then the last quarter of this year, I should have some expectation that's going to remain the same or at least go up. So now if I'm projecting what my expenses are going to be for the next 6 months, I have some built-in knowledge of what the historical patterns are and should give me some insight of, okay, what to expect somewhat, right? The reality is that none of this is really crystal ball. And we, by just making these reports, can become dynamic. We can actually look at and analyze live information and respond when it's true. So even if my Q4 doesn't go up like I've seen historically, well, I have an expectation of a pattern. I take that expectation, I can put that into my cash flow, and then I can watch sales coming in. And if sales isn't increasing, I'm mid-August, early September, not seeing what I would want to see. I know my prediction was off, and it becomes a problem. I'll be 6 weeks ahead of the problem and adjust then, so that I'll still be successful, still be viable, but not expecting, the universe to bail me out with revenue that wasn't possible.
And where do those guesses show up? So for example, when you say, hey, when I get to the end of the 3rd quarter or the beginning of the 4th quarter, are you just putting some guesses out there based on those trends that you've seen historically and saying, okay, by the end of September, revenue should be this, expenses should be that, profit should be that. And then when you get there, you're just measuring against that to see if that trend is true?
Yeah, I didn't prepare example for the briefing, but we've talked about a bingo card. And what a bingo card really is to say, hey, in this second of time, be by quarter or by month, here's the clients that usually fill in that revenue. So August. What I should be able to say, and I'm used to 4 clients at $50,000 each to give me that $200,000. In my sales pipeline today, right now, July 19th, I should have some sense of who those clients are and what those projects are. If I'm going to receive money in August, I should definitely be able to identify them in mid-July. If I don't hear 1, 2, 3, 4 of those $50,000 projects in my pipeline, let alone probably 8, in order for me to actually get 50% wins and hit 4, I know that already my prediction for August is off because my sales number aren't telling me that. And then again, you should early enough even understand some early September stuff right now. It's easy to look 60 days out in the sales pipeline and get a sense of who's calling, what projects are usually there, what we're pitching on, even just, some warm leads from somebody. And hey, usually need 3 to 4 leads for every 1 lead that I'm going to win. So I should start seeing those numbers accumulate. And if they're not accumulating my sales, I'm going to start projecting my revenue very differently. And then I'm going to expect to match my expenses to whatever my revenue prediction is.
Yeah, I'm actually finding the bingo card that we built. What time was that last year? Was it about this time last year?
Yeah, it usually is. Because everyone asks the same questions every year at the same time.
I'm kind of curious to see if this is out of date. Forgive me. But here was this idea, right, of the bingo card where we were looking for certain types of projects, certain budgets, and then we just said, hey, historically, we're going to get those projects from these types of clients. Are you seeing my screen here, Tim?
Yeah, we can see it.
This all came from sales data. Again, this is all pretend data that we Greeked out, but we said, oh, well, let's look at our sales history, map it onto this bingo card, and we came up with this 2.2 million revenue. I thought it was a really good example of, I don't know, it's sort of a, what is it that's happening in our brains when we're doing this bingo card thinking?
Yeah, you know what happens is that if we just have some random number,
Yeah. Of course, my screen share got nixed. So
yeah,
you don't see my bingo card anymore.
no. And Lydia picked up your
I think what was fun last year was we even said, oh, in the bingo card where say I had something like Boeing, right? Because I know I did $250,000 with Boeing last year. We said, well, what if that was just a category or a vertical? So it's not necessarily Boeing, but it's Boeing or Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or whatever. And we said, oh, now my brain knows where to go and to fill those slots because I know how to solve those kinds of problems for those size budgets. And I can, my brain has something actionable to work on.
or the swap, right? So you usually have Boeing and Google calls. You have this strange bias that says, well, Boeing's always going to be there and Google's an extra. But reality is Boeing's not calling and Google did. I now could swap it and realize I'm not greater than, I'm just a break even. And now I'm back to like a pretty, healthy expectation of what my quarter should look like and not over projecting or overspending when reality I'm actually break even when I swap one company for the other.
So the other thing my brain is thinking about, and this is maybe helpful to people listening, is the way my brain works is if I am trying to create the future that happened, but now